And so there we have it, guys. The door is done. It's finally in. Yeah. Okay, now that the exciting milling part is done, let's get to the actual build. Now there are tons of things that I would have changed if I were to do this again. My original thought was to laminate 1/2-inch poplar on top of a 3/4 inch thick plywood, which would have given me a door that was roughly 1 3/4 inches. But upon further research and speaking to the local fire marshal, my original idea would not have met code, since by using the plywood, it would be considered a solid core door and not a solid wood door, and those are different things. My take on it is that since not all plywoods are graded the same, some can have voids and therefore not meet the minimum solid 1 3/8 that's required by code. If I had known that, I would have just used a single 8/4 poplar, milled it down to 1 3/4 and then joined them together. But instead, I'm left with combining the two 3/4 inch thick poplar to give me a final 1.5 inch door thickness, which the fire marshal was okay with. In milling up the door and gluing it together, I didn't realize that the thickness of the door was pretty much the same thickness of the actual hardware that I'm going to use. It's made for 1.5 inch door, but there's not enough sidewall between the hardware and the actual door face. My concern is that when I go to route out the actual mortise for me to set the concealed door hardwares in, the sidewall is going to chip or it could crack. So what I ended up doing was add an additional layer of poplar 1/4 inch around the entire edge of the door and just kind of make it look like a shaker style kind of door. This side will only be visible in the garage, and the other side, it doesn't really matter because that will be cladded in the white oak panels. So with the additional 1/4 inch thickness, I feel much more comfortable using the template to route out the mortise for the actual hardware. So let's go ahead and do that. If you're interested in learning more about this hardware and the other hardwares that I'll use for my living room project, check out the first video in this series by clicking the link in the description after this video, of course. This specific hardware is the HES 3D from Sugatagesune. They do come with templates, but it's a paper template, and I'd much rather use a template that will allow my patterning bit to reference off of. It's much more accurate and cleaner this way. So I made the templates on my CNC and it worked fine. There are companies out there who will make templates just for this hinge. If you're installing a lot of these every month, I definitely would recommend buying those templates. It's going to be a lifesaver. Since I only have one shot to get this right, I'm going to create a mock-up first just to make sure my template location and sizes are spot on. My first pass with the template removed the shallow mortise to create a shoulder area for the hinge to recess in. For this second pass, I'm using a smaller template which will route out the deeper mortise for the body of the hinge. I created 2 screw holes in each template to make sure that they would align perfectly. The struggle in this process was actually trying to find the right length bit since these pockets were pretty deep. And as you can see, the side walls are quite thin, so I think 1 3/4 inches would be the thinnest I'll go on these doors if you're planning to use these hinges. And man, I have to say, this hardware looks super duper good. Now that I know the template works, I can go ahead and create the pockets on my frame and the door. I'm marking the center of my hinge on the frame first, and then I'll transfer that mark onto the door. Another thing I did was to mark the orientation of everything. Since I'll trim the door down later, I marked the bottom of the door to let me know that that's where I can trim the door if I need to. That way the hinge location won't change and everything will fit together. If I were to trim the top of the door by accident, then the location of the top hinge on my jamb would no longer line up to the door. Or if it did, then there would be essentially a gap at the top since I've made the door shorter, if that makes sense. With all the center lines marked out, I'll repeat the same process using the templates to mortise out the area. To join the face frames together, I'll use dominoes. The dominoes will be located on the ends of the head jamb and on the face of the side jambs. I'll make the mortise for the head jambs first, and then I'll transfer the center marks onto the side jambs to make sure the joint aligns. Even though dominoes are great at aligning pieces together, I still like to use a square clamp to ensure that everything is perfectly squared while the glue sets. And since I don't have any thresholds attached to the frame to prevent the frame from racking, I'll go ahead and tack a strip of wood into place. That should keep things together temporarily. Now that the frame is done, I can move on and trim the door down to size. This is where having a track saw comes in handy. Once the door is trimmed, I can mock up and install with the hinges to make sure that I got all the measurements right. Making the rough adjustments now will help later on once the door is installed in the final location. Now that the mock-up is done, and a few, more like many months later, I can finally get the door installed. We had a snowstorm that hit us here in the south and caused some damage to our water pipe, and that was priority number one for us to fix, which took a big chunk out of our living room project, which meant it had to be placed on hold until we were able to replenish the funds. So I'm happy that it's finally getting done. Removing the door was pretty easy, minus the door falling off the frame. There were a few screws that held the old frame in place, and it was a matter of finding every single one of them. There are plenty of videos going over the step-by-step on how to install a door frame, so I'll keep this pretty brief. The reality is, the opening doesn't necessarily need to be square, and the reality is it's probably not going to be squared anyways. It does help, but what's most important is that the new frame is installed square so that the door operates correctly. I ended up making the frame a little bit too big, so I ran the latch jamb over the jointer a few times, and after that the frame fitted perfectly. Once I got things relatively plumbed, I'll start to secure the frame in place. I'll add a few shims in the back of the frame at various locations to keep the frame from bowing into the stud as I secure it into place. Along the way, I'll use my level to verify that the frame is still plumbed and level and that everything is still nice and squared. Once the frame is in place, I can install the new threshold.
I'm using an in-swing threshold since the door swings into the room rather than out. Typically, these thresholds need to be cut to size to fit the width of the door frame, so the miter saw gets the job done. There are many styles of thresholds out there, but I like this one because it matches the floor we have in our house. Finally, the star of the show. Without this concealed door hardware from Sugatagesune, this project would not be possible. I installed the section for the jamb first, and then installed the main body onto the door. Having two people really helps when installing a solid wood door like this. I did it myself, and it took about 30 minutes just to align everything together, simply because the door was crazy heavy just for one person to carry. But eventually, it all fell into place, and the door was done. One thing I didn't include in the video was me trimming the door since the door was about 1/4 of an inch wider than the frame. Head on over to my Instagram if you want to check out that video. So just got a few little adjustments that I needed to make. I didn't record all the small details, but I went ahead and added some drywall compound to smooth things out, because the top portion there, you're actually going to see it once the door is open. So I want to make sure that it's all smooth. So I got about 2 layers on there. I got to sand it and everything. And also I got to install the magnetic door lock. The door is sealed, as you can see there. Got the bottom seal there, and also right now it's kind of janky, but this is how I had to open the door. I got all my seals and door stops on that side. These Sugatagesune hinges are going to be covered after I get the door adjusted. So I'm super happy to finally get the door installed. I think it was the longest process. I think the most difficult part is done, which is the door. Now we can move on to the actual storage unit, the cabinets, the built-in. Got to demo all this first. So I did upload the first part of the video that's going over the overview of the design. Yeah, so if you did enjoy this video, definitely click the like button, comment down below if you have any questions about the door project and the hardware that I use. If you do want to support my channel, definitely click that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you can be notified whenever this part gets released. And then share this video. I'll see you guys next time. This has been Bauer Design Craft Workshop. See ya.